Hi, everyone. Today I have a very interesting person with a very, I find, dramatic story. Her name is Karen Olson, and she's the founder of Family Promise, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to helping the homeless and the low-income families, of which we have many. And her organization has trained and mobilized over 1 million volunteers over the past 30 years to provide services to homeless families. And hi, Karen. I'm glad to have you here.
To be here.
Good. And I got your book, Meant for More, Following Your Heart and Finding Your Purpose, in which you tell your story from the tragedy of your childhood to an adult full of compassion and service. I can really relate to that because my first half of my life was very dark. But then the second half, I feel light and that I'm bringing light. So I relate to that. And I had started reading your book, and it was very well written, I must say.
Thank you.
So let's talk, if you don't mind, a little bit of before the lights came on and the tragedy in your childhood, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, up until I was 10, my life was very joyful. And I was very happy and like a giggly little girl. And then tragedy struck when my mother died suddenly and without warning. I went off to school that morning, kissed my mom goodbye. I was just 12. And then I was called by the principal's office to come, that I was needed at home.
Mhm.
And when the secretary from the church from the school office drove me home, my grandmother was walking down the steps, and I shouldn't have seen her because she was on a train into New York. But lo and behold, she was called back home like I was called, because my mother had a tragic accident, and she died, and I had no warning of that. Although she was not getting along with my father. My father was having an affair, and so my mother was very, very depressed.
Of course.
So that was a tragedy, and I have to ask God, like, why? And I didn't have any answer then, and for that, maybe there is no answer, but God can take what happens and make the rough edges smoother and use it for his purpose. He doesn't cause it, but he can use it for his purpose.
Yes, I agree. And I love finding guests like you that bring light into our world, even no matter what their childhood was like, or whatever, they find their mission or their purpose. And you have a story in the book that was kind of a turning point for you, I think. And that is the story about that chance encounter at Grand Central Station in 1981. Will you share that story with our listeners?
Yes, I always wanted to do something to help people. After my mother died, I knew such hurt. It left a hole in my heart, and I didn't want anyone else to suffer. And I wanted to become a nurse. But unfortunately, my stepmother told my father that she had been a nurse and that I didn't have what it takes to become a nurse. Well, becoming a nurse was my way of helping. So
Yeah.
I was so that my dream was shattered. And so I studied business administration and later became a marketing executive for the Warner Lambert Company.
Mm.
And that day I was commuting into New York for some meetings, and I was about to pass a woman who sat outside of Grand Central Station. I had seen her before, and she always looked down, like it was just way too much effort for her to lift her head up. She was obviously depressed, and I could relate to that. I'd never been homeless. In fact, I grew up in one of the most affluent communities in the United States. That was Darien, Connecticut. But I, just on impulse, when I saw this woman so depressed, I could relate to that. And so I ran across the street and on impulse, I got her a sandwich, a ham and cheese sandwich
Oh,
and an orange juice.
yeah.
And when I came back, I handed it to her and she lifted her head up and she said, "Thank you, God bless you. I haven't eaten anything since yesterday."
Oh,
And at that point, she raised her hand up to mine, and I took her hand in mine.
mhm.
And even though it was November and it was cold, there was a certain warmth in her hand. And I realized that I had crossed an invisible line, that I would never be able to look at homeless people like I had before. And how I looked at them before was they were the untouchables, because that's what my grandmother had told me.
Mm,
And she, we made a connection. And from there, I told my two sons, who were then 10 and 12, Doug and Brad, about Millie. And they said, "Let's go into New York and find more people like Millie and bring in sandwiches." So that was sort of the turning point where fate intervened and I was put on a different path.
wow. And that's how it happens. Just some small encounter or something.
Mhm.
And I totally relate to that. And then, so you decided to start a group or foundation called Family Promises, right?
Mhm. Family promise, yeah. It wasn't immediate.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last thing you said.
It wasn't immediate. I um, I began bringing in sandwiches to the Port Authority bus terminal with my two sons.
Mm,
And essentially anybody sitting on a bench was not waiting for their bus. They were simply homelessness. They were simply homeless. And the Port Authority bus terminal brought warmth and comfort to them. So we would go in every other Sunday for the next 2 years and bring in sandwiches. First, we made 25, and they were distributed all too quickly. And then we would make up to 100 sometimes
yeah,
sandwiches. But I realized for the people that we met there, John and Abe and Arthur and Lucille and many others where we knew their name, that the sandwich was just a vehicle to say we cared. It was about a gesture to say we
right,
cared.
yeah,
And that began an outreach. It wasn't through an organization, it was just on our own. It just, to me, it was logical. We saw people who were hurting and lonely and sometimes depressed, and it became the natural thing to do. And we met people like Arthur, who fought in World War II, and in the inside of his jacket, he had medals pinned inside his jacket. And he
mm,
would tell my sons war stories.
mm,
And then there was Lucille, who lived under the escalator with her little kitten in a bag. And she said she was a first grade teacher. And she would tell Doug, "Now, Doug, you study hard. You don't want to end up here homeless like I am." But on other days when she probably was without her medication, we were the CIA or the FBI, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs. And the kindest thing we could do was not to come near her. Um,
and the thing you just said is what happens. I think a lot of people think the homeless
drink.
people are alcoholics, are just lazy, and don't want to work, and they don't realize that a lot of it is mental illness involved. And I
Yes.
I know about that because I have a daughter that's a counselor in the VA, and she sees the way um, our military come home very damaged.
Uh-huh.
Some of them never recover, and they become these homeless people. So how
That's true.
how often did you go with the sandwiches?
about every other week for 2 years.
Oh, good.
And that's when we got to know people by name.
Yeah.
And we, in fact, when Thanksgiving was coming close, we decided to invite our friends from Port Authority bus terminal back to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. So I went into the city about 3 weeks before, got bus tickets, and gave them in a little card, inviting them for Thanksgiving dinner.
Oh.
So, yeah, so lo and behold, here in suburban community of Summit, New Jersey, they got off the bus, about 8 people. And we picked them up in our cars and brought them back to my house. What's interesting, I had never cooked. I'm not a very good cook. And I had never cooked a Thanksgiving dinner, but that was one of the best Thanksgivings we've ever had.
Oh, I
mean, I
can't
would,
imagine. You can't.
yeah, I would go to my father's on Thanksgiving, but this time I invited my neighbors, who I knew were good cooks also. And so they brought, so they brought food, and it was just a joyous Thanksgiving, especially to see the smiles on our friends from Port Authority.
So tell me about family promise. Tell me that.
Okay. Well, after that, I began volunteering in my county of Union County, New Jersey. And that's where I volunteered at soup kitchens and shelters. And I was meeting families who had no telltale signs of homelessness, but yet they were homeless. And I thought, wow, does the religious community know? And if they did know, would they want to help? And at that time, the number one reason kids were taken from their parents and placed in foster care was not abuse and neglect. It was simply homelessness. In other words, it was deemed that the parents were unfit to keep their kids if they couldn't put a roof over their heads. So I planned a conference on family homelessness and invited the religious community, knowing that I thought that if they did know about family homelessness in Union County, and at that time it was about 35% of all homeless people or families, that they would want to help. And sure enough, 200 people came to an all-day conference on family homelessness. And I knew there that the compassion was there. They just needed a way to connect. So I was determined to find a building for shelter. But of course, nobody wanted a shelter in their backyard.
No.
And then there were zoning issues, and not one church or synagogue could provide the full-time space for a shelter. So I thought, how am I going to solve this? I thought, well, what if we all take turns? Maybe we could do together what any one house of worship could not do alone. So I ended up with a program called the Interfaith Hospitality Network, later renamed Family Promise, as a way of engaging the community, providing shelter. So that meant the Central Presbyterian Church in Summit would provide shelter about once a quarter. And that was something they could do. And the families would arrive by van at about 6 o'clock. During the day, they had access to what we call our day center. At that time, it was in the Y. And so that gave them a home base. And also it solved the problem of children not going to different school districts, which would have been horrific. So Elizabeth, New Jersey was their permanent address. And after that first year, 70% of the families found housing, and that's significant because most shelters only count bed nights. But something else was happening. The love and support of all the volunteers helped families find housing. They felt like it belonged. I remember one family, the first week, she said, you made me feel at home. I wasn't at home, but I felt like I was home. And that speaks to the caring spirit of the volunteers. And that's the secret sauce. That's Family Promise for all the volunteers.
So that church, you said quarters. So would they keep them for 3 months and then another church would step in?
No, for 1 week. for
Oh,
1 week. So
and then
Central
where,
Presbyterian.
and then where would they go? To another,
They would go to the next church.
in the same town? Or?
No, there were about 5 towns involved, but in close proximity. But each day they would go back to the same day center, the Y in Elizabeth, where they would receive case management, and they could use it.
Yeah, so
Use that as a
they were finding a way to change the
Mhm.
situation, you know,
Yes,
one day at a time or 1 week at a time. So
yes,
they had safety, they had food, they had
right,
resources. Yes,
yes,
and they had that. That's when,
right.
and your success rate was quite high. Right?
Yes, it was very high. I mean, most shelters really don't define success in terms of finding housing. They count bed nights provided.
Yeah,
So it was very successful, not to mention cost effective, because all the space was donated. The volunteers were donated. We hired 2 staff people, a director and a case manager,
yeah.
and which was, oh, and then the van, we got a discount from Autoland on the van, and foundation provided the
Mhm.
rest of the money, and the van had 14 seats. So what do you think the capacity was for our shelter?
Can't even imagine.
14, because our van could only have 14
Oh,
seats.
oh,
So
yeah.
that became our capacity.
We have one shelter that I know of that has a policy where they take them in, but they only can come in if they are sober, not drinking or on drugs,
Yeah,
want to receive training and
right.
to improve their life. And
Mm,
it's a shame because it's just one place. There should be many
yeah,
places like that, you know.
yes, I
That's
know.
the solution. That is a very good solution. And I wish more
Yeah,
towns would implement that kind of thing.
yeah,
Now, some people, of course, we talk about mental illness, you know, some people we can't help that way. You know,
right.
they're not present, sane, they're not sane, not stable.
Mhm.
But a lot of people are like mothers. I was in a situation once, I had 2 children and no child support. And I could see my life going totally different, but I was a very hard worker, resilient, resourceful, and
Mhm.
put myself through college as I had a job,
Mhm.
as I took care of my children. But I took care of the government programs like welfare and food stamps. I didn't feel too
Mhm.
proud to take all the help that I could get.
Good, yeah, it makes sense.
And they paid for
Yeah,
my
Sarah.
college too, and they paid
Yeah,
for the daycare. But I actually know people that I go, why don't you apply for, help? And too proud. And it's crazy.
yeah,
I
that's too
pride
bad.
is not, to me, pride is not like a good characteristic. It's really
No,
fun in times. So Karen, I know that you cannot do a lot for yourself. Are you paraplegic or quadriplegic or
I guess you would say quadriplegic,
do you mind
although
telling
I've
me how
never,
that happened?
oh, okay, well, it was 6 years ago. I was in Florida, and I was staying at a hotel, and I had a condo there actually.
Mhm.
And I was it was a nice sunny day, and I was by the pool, and I was going to have a massage later, but I thought first I'll have some cryotherapy. I don't know if you know what cryotherapy is.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Cryotherapy, for your viewers who may not know,
Yes.
it's cold therapy, and it has the benefits of mental and physical health benefits. And
Mhm.
it gets extremely, extremely cold. And I
Yes.
had done it about 30 times,
Well,
both in Summit, New Jersey, where I lived, and in Florida. And I never had any incident with it. I always thought it was a good thing to do. So I had an appointment for cryotherapy. And when I got to the desk, they said the young woman who would be my attendant, I had only worked there for 4 weeks, but they assured me she was well trained.
mm,
Well, something went wrong. She made the temperature too cold. And I was like frozen. When the EMT people came, they said I was hypothermic. What happened was my body froze and I kept saying, I'm cold, I'm cold. And I have no recollection of this. But she opened the door, but she stood behind the door. And I fell out like a popsicle and hit my head on a raised ledge. And I couldn't feel anything from my neck down. So I called I had the presence of mind to ask for a phone, and I called my two sons, and they came down right away. And the EMTs took me to the hospital in Miami, and I stayed there for a month. And I began to regain some of my feeling. I now feel below my neck. And when something like that happens, you say, why? Why? But I didn't have an answer for that. At least I didn't have an answer right away.
No.
And so I enrolled in a therapy program. And today, 6 years later, I can walk with the help of a walker and an aide who helps me. And so I'm gaining back my strength and my mobility.
Wonderful.
So that's very, very, very encouraging. But I was always very athletic and exercised, and I never thought anything like that would happen. But in an instant, my life changed right before me. I mean, again, you say why, but there is a silver lining. I was always running so fast before I had my accident that I didn't have time to really reflect on all the good that I was doing.
That's true.
And now I could, and people would say to me, did you ever have any idea of what would happen, of what you would have gone on to do? And I said no, but now I had time to reflect. And so that was a little gift in it for me. And I wrote a book.
That's a book.
Yeah, Meant for More, Following Your Heart and Finding Your Purpose, Meant for More. And that was like an extension of the program that I started with Family Promise. I heard so many wonderful stories about our homeless guests and how they found hope and got on their way with the help of Family Promise and volunteers who said, well, we get back more than we give. And so I shared those stories and my own story in there.
You almost answered my next question, because I was going to ask you what message you hope that the readers take from your book. And you're kind of already saying, right?
Yes. Well, that just simple acts of kindness can make such a difference. And it's like the glue that holds our community together. And there's so many things that people can do. You can reach out to someone who's having a rough time. You can cook a meal for someone who's struggling, or even hold the door open for someone, or be kind to those who serve you, at a restaurant.
People don't realize that. I always, when I'm in a restaurant and the waitress comes over later, the first thing I do, if I can't see a name tag, I ask them their name.
It's so important.
And through the dinner, they're coming back and forth. I always end up finding out something about them,
Nice, very nice.
Yeah. And I had written a book or two myself. And then at the end, I give them my card and I tell them about my podcast and things like that. And so I was telling my therapist about it. And I was saying, well, I guess some people would say, oh, you're marketing. That's what you're doing. And she said, you know what? Do you know how many people don't talk to their waiter or waitress?
Yes.
Do not ask their name. Don't care what their name is.
Yes.
Rude to them. You made their day because you treated them as a human being.
Yes.
And they entered your world and you entered theirs. So I never thought of that way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
You saw them when other people wouldn't see them.
Exactly.
You saw them.
I saw them as someone that could relate to me in some way, and I could relate to them in some way, especially women, because I don't think there's a woman alive that has not gone through some trauma in her life.
That's true.
Mine, my parents weren't the best, and then my husbands weren't the best, and I finally found a good one. I went to
Good.
37 years.
Good for you.
Yeah, so I always say it
It's
was
wonderful.
and they were the bad seed. First, but so what could you? Well, I know your own sense of purpose and fulfillment was impacted by all this, of course, as you're telling us. So, what kind of advice for someone just looking to find a purpose and make a positive impact in their community? What kind of advice could you give them?
Just look at what they like to do. I mean, maybe they enjoy knitting or making sweaters, that sort of thing. So start with something you like to do and
Right?
you're proficient at. And then maybe you go to a shelter and you teach women or men too, if they want to, how to knit. So you can start with things that you like to do, or you can just
Right?
volunteer at a shelter, whether it's preparing a meal
Yeah.
or interacting with children, reading stories, all sorts of things.
Sure.
Remember, I started just giving sandwiches to people in New York City. It wasn't even an agency, so you can, or maybe it's, just taking the newspapers in
Yeah.
off your neighbor's porch who you know is away, that sort of thing.
That's the type of thing I did when I moved to Florida and retired because I was bored immediately. And a friend of mine and I started a group called Circle of Friends. And that's the type of things we drew people into our group that wanted to help. And they would call somebody on the phone that was lonely, maybe needed a daily check-in,
Mhm.
help with food. So I would
Right.
get speakers to come speak about different issues that might impact them. And you know what? It does. It makes you feel like you are doing something meaningful, important in some small
Right.
way. And I recently had a situation where I was very overwhelmed. And I'm a caretaker for my husband, he has Parkinson's, and it takes a lot of my time and energy, and I have my own health.
Yes.
And there was just a day that was so overwhelming, and I had a medication completely out. I needed badly. I just didn't have the energy to get in the car to go get that medication. And I thought,
Yeah.
Marie, for 20 years, you've been helping everybody in the community.
Yeah.
Pick up the phone. So I picked up the phone and I called the group and I asked them, if you're out and about, could you pick this up? Of course. And they went and they got it.
Sure.
It's sometimes people that help people forget about themselves, like self-care and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I know you have to be willing to ask for help as well.
yes, or you're
Yeah.
going to burn out. You can burn
Right.
out too. And then you give, and then there's nothing left. So you can't really lift your arms. I notice your age is helping you drink, right?
Right. Well, I can lift I have a cast on my left arm, but
Oh,
I can lift this arm, but
oh,
not my right arm. That's the only thing I can't move my body is my right arm. What's interesting is I'm a painter, I'm an artist, and I'm right-handed. In fact, you can see one of my paintings
is
behind
that
me.
behind you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a field of flowers.
Yeah.
And I would paint with my right hand, but then now I can't use my right hand and I'm right-handed. But I learned how to paint with my left with a gadget, and the paintings are pretty good. I don't have any on the wall yet.
Now, when
But
did you start painting? How old?
well, it was when I was 14 years old. It was after my mother died. And I used to use art class as a time just to fool around with kids in the class.
Yeah.
But my grandmother, who was very close to my mother's mother, loved Venice. And so I found this picture of Venice that Turner had painted. And I was so motivated to do a good job. I stopped fooling around in art class and did a really, really good picture of Venice. And I can move the computer and show you the picture of Venice, Jen.
General.
picture of Venice.
Oh, the shower.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd like to see it. Too much trouble.
Maybe that wasn't such a good idea.
Well, it's fine. I think oh, okay. Yep. I see. The one over on the left, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I see
Mhm.
both. Beautiful. Looks like those are all your paintings.
Right. So then I knew I had ability, and then I continued painting on and off. The painting behind me is one I did on my son's nap time, because I only had time when they were very young to paint. So anyhow, I can now paint with my left hand because I taught myself how to do that.
So you're resilient.
Yes, and resilient. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what all my books talk about. There's a theme of resilience in there because you have to be, or you'll get squashed like a bug. Because life is
Right, exactly.
life is not
Yeah.
easy. And I mean, coming from someone that went through some pretty horrific things when I was younger, people, when they read my first book, which was a biography, they said, I can't believe you went through all that and you're always smiling. You're always smiling. I said, that was my life. And also, 2020, which, was not fun either, leave the house. I got depressed, and my therapist said, why don't you write something? I said, I'm not a writer. She said, well, you told me you wanted to be an English teacher when you were young, and you like to read.
Right.
That's how I ended up writing my book.
That's great. You just needed that suggestion.
The book
was waiting to come.
See how you can impact people with just a
Right.
suggestion. And I found out how to publish it. And I'm self-published on Amazon, which is another thing. But it's just those little nudges you need from people. And that goes for everybody. No matter what situation they are in, they need someone to listen and just to offer a hand or a good word.
Yes.
Smile sometimes,
Yes, it's true.
You have done. So compassion. You're a very compassionate person, I could tell from your story.
Yes.
And compassion plays a major part in having a positive impact on any community. Here we have a lot of homeless. We're in West Palm Beach, and we have people on the corner. However, I was told by someone that works with people, homeless people, don't give them money. Don't give them money. I said, okay. I said, I'm going to carry bottles of water in the car in a cooler. So and I'll hand them a bottle of water. And they said, you can do that. But if they are addicts or alcoholics, you're not helping.
You don't want to give money now.
Yeah, so you don't really.
But you can offer to buy them a sandwich, say.
Yeah, or I was for a while. I had little baggies full of little necessities, and I would stop if I was at a light. But it's so prevalent. Well, everywhere. You see it on the news.
But you know what? For every one person you see who is obviously homeless, there's another person you don't see, and you don't see the woman who's working at McDonald's as she hands you your burger order and says, goodbye, have a great day. And she, after her shift, she goes to live in her car,
Yes.
and maybe with her 7-year-old daughter. So family homelessness doesn't have the same face of homeless as a chronically homeless.
Yes.
And 35% of all those who are homeless are members of families. And that's who I decided to focus on when I formed Family Promise, just families. And
you have to do that. You have to focus on one area so that you can be successful, because you can't, be going here, there, and everywhere. You have to
I'm really a big believer on focusing.
And it amazes me when I see things like somebody has a very expensive dinner at a restaurant and everything, and they don't leave a tip. I'm like, how could you not leave a tip? or even when you go up to a counter and you're getting a coffee and there's a tip jar there, put a quarter in something.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
these people they don't have a lot of money, and every little
No.
bit that goes in that jar helps.
Right, helps. Right.
I have my groceries delivered now, and the store will adjust the tip, and they say you can, leave 10 or 15 or whatever you want to leave. And I always put a tip in the bill. And the one day this young man came in, a lot of groceries, and he brought them all in. And I asked him about it. I was interested because I said, I don't think you get paid that much. How are the tips? He said, would you believe a lot of people don't tip? They don't put a tip on that receipt. I just blown away.
Can't believe that.
Isn't it so hard to believe? Someone is carrying in bags of groceries for you, so you don't have to do it, and you can't put a couple dollars on it. Well, we could go another show on that attitude. We want to stay hopeful. So, how did you? This was a big deal. Your professional responsibilities and this family promise and everything else. And how did you balance your personal responsibilities with all of that, your family, etc.? How did you manage
That was difficult. I didn't do that very well. I,
Yeah.
spent a lot of time building family promise. And at one point, my oldest son came in the dining room. That's where I had my first office. And he said, Mom, I hate homelessness. He was referring to that I was working so much on that. And I said, I do too. And of course, I was saying, I hate homelessness because it shouldn't be. And he was saying, he hates homelessness because, I wasn't always there.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, they knew I really loved them. They did. And that's one thing later, my son told me, he said, you may not have been the best cook or the best housekeeper, but we always knew we were loved. And that's what really makes a difference. And so we're close today. So I have 2 sons and 5 grandchildren, and they volunteer with Family Promise, and it's a good thing.
Family business.
Yes,
Family
yes.
Promise is a family business. So,
Yes.
Karen, I know one of your goals, of course, is to get better physically, I'm sure. But what other goals do you have for the future? For yourself?
For the future?
Yeah, for yourself.
Yeah, well, I want to continue. I know that ministry or outreach doesn't have any boundaries. So I always see continuing to provide service to people, compassionate service, and whatever form that takes. I might write another book, not sure. I have a lot of speaking engagements now from the book, which is wonderful. So I see myself reaching out to people, whether it's somebody on the street or a speaking engagement. I'll be the keynote speaker at the Junior League conference in February. So there's all different ways. I can't tell you what form it'll take, varied forms, but I know you won't find me working at retail in Bloomingdale's or, yeah.
No, you are an example of compassion, resilience, perseverance, all the things that women and men should aspire to. And that one little thing you do for someone, it might not seem like much to you, but it could mean the world to them and a lot. Just even talk to someone.
That's true.
Well, I'm going to close this lovely conversation and thank you for spending time with us. And hopefully we'll talk again.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed talking with you and your listeners.
Good. I'm glad. So I'm going to tell my listeners, my dear ones, remember, compassion is not just an emotion, but a powerful tool for change.
Yes.
And it's a profound reminder that when we lead with our hearts, we can truly make a meaningful impact. So let's all shine some light into the darkness.
I agree. Thank you.